My name is Alice. I'm 27 years old. My landlord thought he had me. This piece of paper? It was supposed to put me on the street and line his pockets with thousands of dollars, but he didn't count on one tiny overlooked sentence, a sentence that was about to unravel his entire case right in front of a judge. Before this whole nightmare started, my life was, well, normal, predictable. I lived in a decent apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was where I came home after a long day, kicked off my shoes, and could finally just breathe. For 2 years, it was my sanctuary. The walls had my favorite posters, the bookshelf was overflowing, and the sofa had a perfect dent molded to my body. It was home. The landlord was, for the most part, a ghost. I paid my rent online, sent maintenance requests through some faceless portal, and a third party handyman would eventually show up. It was impersonal, but it worked. I'd never even met the owner, and honestly, I preferred it that way. In my experience, landlords are best kept at a distance. But then the building was sold, and the new management companies, but they were different. They were aggressive. Their first email wasn't a friendly hello. It was a laundry list of rule reminders and warnings about late fees. The first sign of trouble was almost laughable. There was a shared utility bill that went up and down every month. One month I spotted a discrepancy, a tiny one, 15 bucks. I sent a polite email asking for a breakdown. The response was a cold, one-sentence reply. The amount was correct, and if I didn't pay the full balance, I'd get a late fee. It was the principle of the thing. So I pushed back again, politely. I even attached the previous bills to show this one was an anomaly. Their response? They slapped a $50 late fee on my account. This went on for 2 months. That tiny disputed $15 charge snowballed thanks to a cascade of late fees and administrative charges I'd never even heard of into several $100s. I refused to pay the fees, but I kept paying my actual rent on time to the exact penny every single month. I figured surely a human being will eventually look at this and see how absurd it is. But I wasn't dealing with a human. I was dealing with a system designed to squeeze every last cent out of you. And then it arrived, slipped under my door, an official looking envelope that made my stomach drop. Inside was a 3-day notice to pay or quit. My hands started to shake as I scanned the document. It claimed I owed them thousands of dollars. They had taken the initial disputed amount, the ridiculous late fees, and then, as a final insult, tacked on projected legal fees for the very eviction they were now threatening me with. The total was staggering, impossible. The notice said I had 3 days to pay it all, or they'd start formal eviction proceedings. 3 days, my mind was racing. My home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The threat of an eviction is so much more than just losing a place to live. It's a public court record that follows you, a scarlet letter in the housing world that can make it nearly impossible to rent somewhere else. A wave of pure panic washed over me. I was facing the loss of my home, a huge financial hit, and a level of stress that felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't sleep for those 3 days. I'd just stare at the ceiling, heart pounding, imagining a sheriff knocking on my door, imagining all my stuff piled up on the curb. They had me cornered, or so they thought. Those 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety. I didn't have the thousands they were demanding, and even if I did, there was no way I was paying it. It was extortion, plain and simple. I tried calling the management office, desperately hoping to find one rational person. All I got was a receptionist repeating the same robotic line. You must pay the full amount on the notice to resolve the issue. But the amount is wrong, I'd plead. Can you just look at my payment history? I've paid my rent. This is all just fees. The amount is what the system says you owe, she'd reply, her voice completely devoid of empathy. If you do not pay, we will proceed. It was like arguing with a very expensive, legally aggressive brick wall. I sent emails, dozens of them. I created a detailed timeline, attached scans of my bank statements showing the cleared rent checks, highlighted the original $15 utility charge that started it all, and practically begged them to just look at my file. I documented everything, every call, every email, every letter I sent. Some gut instinct told me to create a paper trail, even though I wasn't sure why. True to their word, a week later, another envelope showed up. This one wasn't just slipped under my door, it was handed to me by a process server, a summons and complaint. They had officially filed an eviction lawsuit against me. Seeing my name on a court document was a whole new level of terrifying. This wasn't a threat anymore, it was real. Court date was printed in bold letters. I had a few weeks to figure out how to fight a battle I had no idea how to win. The helplessness was overwhelming. I'm not a lawyer. The jargon in those legal documents felt like a foreign language, and it's designed that way. It's meant to intimidate you, to make you feel so small and powerless that you just give up. And I'll admit, I thought about it. I thought about just packing up and leaving, letting them have their win just to make the crushing stress go away. But then something else started bubbling up under the fear. Anger. Raw, indignant anger. How could they do this? How could a system be so broken that a $15 dispute could lead to someone losing their home? It was just wrong. And I couldn't let them get away with it. I knew I couldn't afford a lawyer who charges hundreds an hour, so I gave myself a new full-time job, legal researcher. Every night after work, I'd dive into the internet abyss, typing tenant rights, eviction defense, and wrongful eviction into search bars. I ended up on legal aid websites, tenant union forums, and obscure legal blogs. I read my state's landlord tenant laws until my eyes blurred, taking notes and trying to decipher all the legalese. I was drowning in information, and most of it didn't apply to my case. There were defenses about the apartment being unlivable, about landlord retaliation. I went down a dozen different rabbit holes, and each one was a dead end. The stress was immense. It felt like I was searching for a single needle in a continent-sized haystack, all while the clock was ticking down to my court date. My hope started to fade. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was toast. My desk was a disaster zone of paper. There was the original lease, a monster of a 40-page document. There was the stack of increasingly hostile emails from management. And right in the middle, the 3-day notice to pay or quit and the court summons. I'd read them so many times, I felt like I had them memorized. It was 5 a.m., my court date was just days away, and I was on my fourth cup of coffee feeling completely defeated. I decided to read the notice one last time, not for content, just for errors, a typo, the wrong date, anything. My eyes scanned the lines, my brain numb. It listed my name, my address, the landlord's name, reason for eviction, non-payment, and then the amount. That big, terrifying number presented as a single lump sum. You are hereby required to pay the total amount of $3,450 within 3 days. And then something I had read on some obscure legal website suddenly clicked. A sentence I had initially dismissed as legal trivia. It was about how a notice demanding payment has to be precise. My heart started beating a little faster as I frantically scrolled through my browser history. I found the page, a guide for landlords on common eviction mistakes, and there it was, a section on defective notices. The guide explained that in many places, when a landlord issues a notice for non-payment, the notice can only demand the actual past due rent. It can't legally include other charges like late fees, utility bills, or, most shockingly, future legal fees. The law is written this way so the tenant knows the exact dollar amount they need to pay to cure the problem and stop the eviction. By bundling everything into one big scary number, the landlord makes it impossible for the tenant to simply pay the rent they actually owe. They're forcing you to pay all the disputed and often illegal fees, too. My hands flew to my documents. I grabbed my bank statements. I had proof that my actual contractual rent, was paid in full. The thousands of dollars on that notice, it was all fees. Every last cent was a mix of late, charges, penalties, and their own lawyers' costs they had no right to demand before a court had even awarded them. I leaned back in my chair and a slow smile spread across my face. This was it. This was the needle in the haystack. They hadn't just made a small mistake. They had made a critical, fundamental error. The very document that started their entire legal action, the foundation of their whole case, was legally defective. It was invalid. The feeling was electric. It wasn't just relief. It was a surge of adrenaline, of power. The fear that had been strangling me for weeks finally started to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't a helpless victim anymore. I was a person who had found a crack in their armor. The one clause wasn't in my lease, it was a clause in the law, a rule they had broken in their haste and arrogance. They had overplayed their hand, and that very tactic was about to be their undoing. I finally had a weapon, and I knew exactly and I use it. The day I had to go to court arrived. Walking into that courthouse was surreal. The air is thick with tension in a place like that. I found the right courtroom, a small, intimidating space filled with anxious people. My landlord was there, sitting with a lawyer who looked expensive and smug. They glanced over at me, sitting all alone on the other side of the aisle, and I saw this flicker of dismissive confidence in the lawyer's eyes. They saw an easy win. When my case was called, my legs felt like lead as I walked to the table. My heart was going a mile a minute. The judge, an older woman with a tired but no nonsense look, peered down at us over her glasses. "Plaintiff's counsel, you may begin," she said. The landlord's lawyer stood up, oozing confidence. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of non-payment. My client served the defendant with a 3-day notice to pay or quit for $3,450.50. The defendant failed to pay. We are asking for a judgment of possession and for the full amount due." He slid the paperwork over with a flourish. The judge glanced at the papers, then looked at me. "And your response?" This was it. My throat was so dry, I stood up, my hands trembling just a little as I clutched my own folder. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "I move to dismiss this case." The landlord's lawyer let out a quiet, condescending scoff. The judge's eyes narrowed just a bit. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the 3-day notice to pay or quit is fatally defective, and therefore this court lacks jurisdiction." I'd practiced that line 100 times. The lawyer's smirk completely vanished. "Explain," the judge said. "Your Honor," I went on, feeling more confident with every word. "The notice demands a lump sum that includes not just rent, but also late fees, administrative charges, and even the plaintiff's own future legal fees. My actual rent was fully paid when the notice was served, and I have the bank records right here to prove it." I laid my statements on the table. "Under this state's law," I pushed on, "a notice to pay or quit must state the precise amount of rent due and nothing more. This is to ensure the tenant has a clear chance to cure the default. By bundling illegitimate fees into the demand, the plaintiff made it impossible for me to exercise my rights. This renders the notice invalid." Silence. The judge picked up the landlord's notice and read it carefully. She looked at the total. Then she looked back at the lawyer. "Counsel," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "is it true that this amount includes charges other than rent?" The lawyer, for the first time, looked flustered. "Well, Your Honor, those are fees stipulated in the lease if—" The judge cut him off. "That's not what I asked. I asked if this notice, a statutory notice for non-payment of rent, includes charges beyond the rent itself." "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "No buts," she said sharply. She looked from the documents to me, then back to the lawyer. She took off her glasses and sighed. It felt like an eternity. Then she looked directly at the landlord and his lawyer and said the two most beautiful words I have ever heard. "Case dismissed." The lawyer's jaw actually dropped. My landlord's face went crimson. "Your Honor, you can't be serious," he blurted out. "I am perfectly serious," the judge replied, her voice like ice. "You served a defective notice. If you want to evict this tenant, you'll have to start the entire process over, and this time I suggest you follow the law. This matter is concluded." She banged the gavel, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. I just stood there for a second, stunned. I won. I packed up my folder, my hands no longer shaking. As I walked out of the courtroom, I passed my landlord in a heated, whispered argument with his lawyer. I didn't even look at him. I just kept walking, feeling the weight that had been on my shoulders for months just evaporate. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunshine, and for the first time in a very long time, I could breathe again. They had me terrified, but I found the one thread to pull, and their whole case unraveled. I fought back, and I won. The walk home from that courthouse was one of the best of my life. The victory was sweet, but I'm a realist. A dismissal on a technicality didn't mean they couldn't try again. But something had fundamentally shifted. The power dynamic was totally different. They knew I wasn't an easy target anymore. They knew I'd done my homework and was willing to fight. About a week later, I got a new letter from them. It wasn't a threat. It was an offer. They proposed to waive all the fees and reset my account to zero if I signed a document releasing them from any further claims. No apology, of course, but it was a clear surrender. I took the deal. The war was over. What I learned is that my situation wasn't unique. In fact, it's a shockingly common tactic. Big landlords and management companies often rely on automated systems and pure intimidation. They send out these notices with inflated numbers, knowing that most people will either be too scared to fight or just won't know how. They are literally counting on your ignorance. This specific mistake, including non-rent fees in a notice to pay rent, is one of the most frequent and fatal errors landlords make. This very issue pops up in courts all the time. For instance, in a 2019 case in Connecticut, Omarajo Presidential Village, and that's LLC versus Perkins, the court ruled that a landlord couldn't lump other fees into an eviction notice for a subsidized tenant because it wasn't clear what the tenant had to pay to keep their home. The court basically said it's the landlord's job to be clear, not the tenant's job to be a detective. The law is designed this way for one critical reason: to protect you. It establishes that your housing can't be held hostage over a disputed late fee. You must be given a clear, straightforward path to fix the actual problem, the unpaid rent. So, what can you do? If you ever get an eviction notice, don't panic, become a detective. First, read that notice like you're searching for treasure. Does the dollar amount match up exactly the amount of rent you owe? If it includes any other fees, late charges, utilities, you name it, the notice could be legally garbage. Second, check the timeline. Did they give you the full 3, 5, or 10 days required by your local law? They can't just make up a shorter deadline. Third, know what kind of notice you're looking at. Is it a pay or quit notice, which gives you a chance to fix the problem? Or an unconditional quit notice? Using the wrong one can get their whole case thrown out. And finally, never ever let a landlord engage in a self-help eviction. That means they can't change your locks, shut off your water or power, or toss your stuff on the street without a court order. That is super illegal just about everywhere. Knowledge is your shield and your sword here. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a landlord try to pull a fast one? Ever been hit with some ridiculous made up fee or a threatening notice? Share your story in the comments. What happened? How did you handle it? And what did you learn? Your story could be the one that helps someone else who's going through it right now. And if you found this valuable and want to arm yourself with more knowledge to protect yourself, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Remember, you're not alone in this. My journey from that terrifying piece of paper to hearing the judge say, "Case dismissed," taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. The details matter. An entire legal case with the power to turn my world upside down was built on a foundation of mistakes. It looked big and scary from the outside, but it was just a house of cards. All I had to do was find the one loose brick. They might own the property, but you have rights. Those rights are written into law, and they are powerful, but only if you know what they are and how to use them. Read your lease, know the laws in your city and state, and never let a bully in a suit convince you that you have no options. Sometimes their biggest threats are just a bluff, waiting for someone brave enough to call it.